You mentioned that there are a number of things about this that have been disappointing to you in the process. I'm disappointed in Senator Cruz, partly because he stole a lot of my originalism plan of questioning, but also because he went to mutton busting. I was convinced that I was the only guy that had mutton busting in today's pool. So my wife also sent me a text a little bit ago and said, and I'm sure she didn't expect me to read it, but how in the world is Gorsuch able to go so many hours at a time without peeing? I won't make you answer, but the SCOTUS bladder is something the whole country stands in awe of. So you're over halfway through your 11 hours today, so congratulations. Judge, let's do biography for just a second. You're a father. Remind me the ages of your children.
Boy, I don't even know what to say now. You really caught me off guard there, Senator Sasse.
You're welcome.
My daughters are 17 and 15.
Okay. So besides fishing, have they ever played sports?
Oh, my goodness. Yes.
Have you ever gotten to a Little League game early, pulled the umpire aside in the parking lot, and asked him or her to commit in advance that they will decide the games for the underdog?
No, but I think some of my buddies have.
Have you ever asked a referee underneath the zebra stripes of their jersey to wear your kid's Little League jersey as the undershirt below the referee's
No, it wouldn't have helped any. My kids were pretty rotten at basketball.
We're obviously not going to pursue this very far, but I do want to make sure that everybody at home knows a little bit of what's been happening in the room over the course of the last 6 or 7 hours. Because some of my colleagues are asking a bunch of tough questions that are really important for you to have to answer. At the same time, there are a whole bunch of questions that have been asked today that are really asking you to take your legal career and your legal ethics and set them aside and play politician on TV today. And that really isn't your job, and some of this questioning really hasn't been a fruitful use of our time. It's well-meaning to talk about the outcome objectives of a whole bunch of these cases, but I would submit that it's dead wrong. I want to give you just a couple of the questions we've heard earlier today. At different times, how can we have confidence that you won't be for the big guy? At another point, how can we know that you feel for the little guy? This sounds noble, but it's fundamentally a corruption of what the judge's job is. To seek assurances from you like this is like seeking assurances from a referee before the game that they will pledge to a certain outcome before the tip-off. If the law is wrong, and I'm somebody who believes that lots of our laws are wrong and overreaching around here, the question should be directed back at us on this panel and on this dais why we don't fix the laws that are wrong. We shouldn't be asking you as the judge to commit that when our laws are clunky and bad and in conflict, you will divine how to change the law on the fly. That's not the oath that you'll take. That's not the Constitution that we've all taken an oath to and pledged to. And it's not what the American people want. So, frankly, I applaud you for your perseverance and patience with us as we've continually gone down a path of asking you to answer questions, many of which are fundamentally political questions, and that you shouldn't be answering, and that we shouldn't be asking. So thank you for your endurance. I'd like to go back to something that's a little more productive for the committee, and frankly, I think productive for the moms and dads at home. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about the judge's robe. We both spoke about it yesterday, I would note, with no coordination. It turns out we've both just read your stuff from the past. And the judge's black robe reminds us of the meaning of your job. It reminds the plaintiffs that stand before the court. It reminds the judge as he or she dresses in the morning, and it reminds our kids, or it gives us an opportunity to teach our kids. And you've spoken eloquently about it in the past, but I think it's fitting for you to unpack it a little bit more in light of some of today's questioning. Earlier today, you were implored to tell us a little bit more about what is in your heart. And I think that's fundamentally a confusing question for us to be asking of a judge, except insofar as we would ask you, are you a man of your word who, when you take an oath in your heart, are pledging to keep your word and to keep your oath? And I think we all know that the answer to that question is yes, and it's why you're going to be confirmed, because people believe you to be a good and fair-minded judge. But every American, in a more fundamental way, needs to know what's in the heart of legislators, because we are supposed to speak for the hearts and minds and hopes and dreams of 320 million American people. We are supposed to cast a vision for the country, those things we want to conserve and preserve, and those things that we should argue about and change. We are the ones who are supposed to weigh the pros and cons of various legislative options that are available to us. Judges, on the other hand, are supposed to be following the law impartially. Your heart is supposed to be inclined neither toward the rich, nor toward the poor, nor toward black, nor white, nor people with big bank balances or small bank balances, but your heart is supposed to be your commitment to the law as you find it. So let's engage in a little thought experiment. 30 or 40 years from now, when you retire and hang up your robe and you're out fishing or sitting on the front porch of your surely lovely home, and you look back over your career, how will you know if you were a good judge?
Senator, that's a question I ask my kids every semester when I teach ethics. Finish the semester with asking them to spend 5 minutes writing their obituary. They hate it. They think it's corny. I might be a little corny. And then I ask them if they'll volunteer to read some of them. And people want to be remembered for the kindnesses they showed other people, by and large. And what I point out to them, what I try to point out is, it's not how big your bank account balance is. Nobody ever puts that in their draft obituary, or that they billed the most hours, or that they won the most cases. It's how they treated other people along the way. And for me, it's the words I read yesterday from Increase Sumner's tombstone. And that means as a person, I'd like to be remembered as a good dad, a good husband, kind and mild in private life, dignified and firm in public life. And I have no illusions that I'll be remembered for very long. None. If Byron White is as nearly forgotten as he is now, as he said he would be, I have no illusions. I won't last 5 minutes. That's as it should be. The great joy in life, Shaw said, is devoting yourself to a cause you deem mighty before you're thrown on the scrap heap. An independent judiciary in this country, I can carry that baton for as long as I can carry it. And I have no illusions I'm going to last as long as you suggest. And that'll be good enough for me.
Well said. And would it be that more who taught legal ethics and business ethics and medical ethics and theological ethics would assign their students the obituary challenge? We might live less in the soundbite culture and more in a way that thinks about service and duty and calling. It's a great assignment. Neither Cory Gardner nor Michael Bennet have to fear that you're going to challenge them for a Senate seat from Colorado in the future?
Senator, I admire them both, and I think it's a wonderful fact that they were both here to introduce me, and that they follow a tradition, the West, where Senator Salazar and Senator Allard, Republican, Democrat, introduced me last time around. And frankly, 10th Circuit nominations, thanks to, he's not here at the moment, but Senator Hatch cares about the 10th Circuit. Republican and Democrat generally go on very smoothly. And it shows. It shows that you all have picked, I don't know how it works. I don't know how this crazy process works. But the colleagues you've selected for me over the years are wonderful colleagues, wonderful people. And I've been richly blessed to spend 10 years with every one of them.
So when you distinguish between the rearview mirror of a justice later, or a judge later in life looking back, and the rearview mirror of a senator, we have different callings. And so I think, without putting words in your mouth, you're going to be able to say that you can be proud of your career even if you failed to advance your policy preferences in this calling. But unpack that for the American people. Help them understand how the retrospective look of a senator at her or his career is different than a judge's retrospective look?
I suspect, but I don't know, because I haven't sat where you sit, and I wouldn't presume to be able to walk in your shoes. But I presume, gingerly, that you will look back on your career and say, I accomplished this piece of legislation or that piece of legislation, and changed the lives of the American people dramatically as a result. I was fortunate enough to serve as a page in this body many years ago. It's an experience every young person should have. It'll give them a lifelong love of this body. It is the greatest deliberative body in the world. I believe that even sitting here. A judge looking back, the most you can hope for is you've done fairness to each person who's come before you, decide their case on the facts and the law, and that you've just carried on the tradition of a neutral, impartial judiciary that each person can come to with some sense that they're going to receive a fair hearing for their disputes. That's what we do. We just resolve cases and controversies. And lawyers are supposed to be fierce advocates. And I was once a fierce advocate for my clients. But a judge is supposed to rule impartially, to listen courteously and rule impartially. So, frankly, my legacy should look and will look a lot smaller than yours. And that's the way the design of the Constitution works.
In an earlier line of questioning, you were asked about 2004 and the presidential election and your participation in it. I just want to clarify, you were not a judge in 2004.
Goodness, no.
Correct.
Senator. I was a private attorney.
And when you went onto the bench, what changed in your life?
Justice Jackson says, a robe changes a man, or it should. Now, I'm sure he would add woman today, too. A psychological change comes over that person. He was the fiercest possible advocate, attorney general for FDR. And he wrote a dissent, as we've talked about earlier, in Korematsu. He wrote the steel seizures concurrence. It's a brave man. That's a judge's judge. Calling it like he sees it in each case as it comes, and writing clearly so that people can understand exactly what he's up to, and he's not hiding behind jargon, legalese, or 4 million footnotes. That's the best I can do on that.
Senator Cruz earlier asked you a series of questions about originalism, and I appreciated your I'll probably paraphrase you inartfully, but you said you worry that the labels sometimes put us into boxes that eliminate the requirement or reduce the requirement we have to actually engage each other's ideas. So I won't pin you down hard on the term originalism, but many have critiqued originalism, including in some statements yesterday and today here, as backward focused or, quote, too rigid in adapting to our changing culture. Do you believe that originalism is just one judicial philosophy among many, or is it a description of what judges do?
I'm with Justice Kagan on this. I think it's what we all want to know. I don't know a judge who wouldn't want to know what the original understanding is of a particular term in the Constitution or a statute. That's information that would be valuable to any judge and considered by any judge. Again, in Heller, for example, Second Amendment case, deeply thoughtful opinions by both sides on that question. It doesn't necessarily decide the case, but it provides us a language to talk to one another in which we're trying to seek something outside of ourselves, outside of our own personal beliefs about what the Constitution or the statute at hand means. We're trying to do it in a way that's neutral and that we can say provides fair notice to those whose lives we're affecting, so that we're interpreting the law in a way that we can say they should have known. They were on notice. We're not putting a person in prison willy-nilly based on our preferences or taking away their liberty, but we're preserving it in accordance with the Constitution as it was written.
I'd like to talk a little bit about cultural catechesis or civics. As you and I have discussed in previous meetings, I'm of a view that we have a crisis. We are not passing on the meaning of America to the next generation. Something like 40% of Americans under age 35 tell pollsters that they think the First Amendment might be dangerous because you might use your freedom of speech to say something that would hurt somebody else's feelings. Actually, that's quite the point of America, right? That there are all sorts of things people might differ about, they might want to argue about. Our founders came here and they didn't have the same views of heaven and hell and how you achieve salvation. And they came together and they forged out of the many one polity where we have a shared framework for ordered liberty, where we protect each other's rights, even to be wrong about fundamental things, wrong in our own views as we wrestle with these things. But we debate big and important questions in Washington, but more fundamentally in Boulder or in Fremont or Omaha, Nebraska. And you do it in the town square, and you do it at the church or the synagogue, you do it in the bar. And you fight about questions, but fight free from violence. And so we protect each other's rights to argue and to dissent. And we're not explaining that First Amendment to the next generation. And I believe that all three branches, the legislative, executive, and judicial branches, are led by people who are taking an oath to a constitution that's about limited government. It's about principled pluralism. It's about intentionally distinguished and divided powers. And I think all three branches have an obligation to do some of that teaching about civics. President Reagan, long before he was Republican president, before he was a Republican governor, when he was a Democratic labor union organizer, Ronald Reagan used to say, in any republic, you're always only one generation away from the extinction of freedom. If we don't pass along the meaning of America to the next generation, it means the next generation of our rulers aren't going to understand why we have this beautiful inheritance that we have in a constitutional system of limits. As a judge on the 10th Circuit, and soon to be as a justice on the Supreme Court, can you explain what you think your responsibilities and freedoms are to teach civics to the American people?
Senator, as a judge on the 10th Circuit, I've tried hard to do that, literally teaching class, speaking where I'm invited, when I'm invited, going to law schools, talking to students who visit the courthouse. And it's been a great privilege and a joy. I think here of Justice O'Connor, Sandra Day O'Connor. And when she retired, she did an awful lot of this. She's done an amazing amount of work. And I do think that there is a need to remind people how to talk to one another, how we talk to one another, and more fundamentally about how brilliant the design of this Constitution is. Not perfect, but e pluribus unum, from anyone. And we are all, not Republican judges, Democrat judges, we're judges. And I think we do have an opportunity, and that's one of the things I look forward to as a justice. My little talks might be a little better attended on civics, and I hope to do that. Maybe that's a Western thing, I don't know, or Midwestern thing, Senator. But I really believe in this country, and I'm optimistic about its future. I see the young people, I teach them, I get law clerks. They really care about this country. And they give me hope every day. Senator Coons and I share the distinction of being Truman Scholars. And we go through the selection process of picking the next crop every year. Harry Truman didn't want a monument as a memorial here in Washington. Think about that. The humility of that. Instead, he wanted a living monument, a scholarship to young people who go on to do public service. Well, I've got two of them here. And every year when I go do that selection process, I don't know about Senator Coons, but it's one of the best days of the year for me, because I see young people full of enthusiasm for this country and anxious to make it better. I look forward to working, if I'm so fortunate to be confirmed, on just this topic, Senator, with you, with Senator Coons, and anyone else.
Talk a little bit about the role of writing in the life of a justice. Justice Scalia was obviously a writer with a flourish. You've discussed having been tapped in the past to participate in speech writing. Talk about the purposes of both concurring dissents and traditional dissents, and what you think the objectives are at the appellate level, in your opinions, and is there a distinction when you're on SCOTUS?
When I sit down to write an opinion, people sometimes ask me who I'm writing for. I'm writing for myself, trying to convince myself that I've got it right. And I go through a lot of drafts. And I sometimes, as my law clerks know, change tack as I'm drafting. I don't know how many drafts I've gone through on some opinions, but 30, more.
He actually said 130, but whatever.
Because I'm trying to get it right. And I find I test ideas as I write. It's one thing to say to somebody else, oh, go write this up. It's another thing to have to sit down and write it yourself. And it exposes holes and gaps in your own thinking, causes you to question yourself, wonder whether you have it right. So for me, it's an exercise of getting it right and persuading myself at the end of the day. And writing in a language that persuades me. A lot of gobbledygook, and us lawyers are guilty of a lot of gobbledygook. That doesn't persuade me. I want to know through a clear line. I want to be able to see my argument from my topic sentences, and maybe it's Sister Rose Margaret, I don't know. But I want to see the argument flow. I want to see how it fits together, and then I want it torn apart by my law clerks who tell me I'm wrong. So it's an iterative process. So at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. And then it's about the test of my colleagues. And I take their comments very seriously. I believe in collegiality. I believe that 2 heads, 3 heads, 9 heads are better than 1. And so I think a good judge can't have too much pride of authorship as to accept criticism, constructive criticism, and try and incorporate or deal with that criticism. Maybe that's why my opinions have attracted relatively few dissents. I don't know. But I take collegiality very seriously. As to writing separate opinions, I don't do it very often. And when I do it, it's usually because I'm just stuck. I might be wrong, but I'm just stuck. Something doesn't seem right to me. And I've tried to discuss it with my colleagues. I've tried to work it out. I bend as far as I can bend. But at the end of the day, I take the oath to follow the law where it leads me. And I try hard to reach a collegial consensus, but when I can't, I write up what I can as respectfully as I can, and usually in as few words as I can, a dissent or a separate concurrence. Sometimes, because it's fact-bound, but it's just where I'm stuck. Sometimes because I see an issue that my bosses need to be aware of. Like any good employee, hey, boss, you might want to think about this one. Seems kind of tough to me. And I think that's part of the process of a good judge.
I'm a historian by background, and when I was writing my dissertation, to your audience question, one of my advisors just kept pounding me saying, I don't know who you're writing for here. It seems scattered all over the place. And he finally persuaded me to put a picture of my aunt on the farm next to my computer. And she's smarter than I am, but she knows nothing about my topic. And he said, if you recognize that your audience should be smarter than you, but ignorant of the subject matter, you're finally going to find your voice.
Yeah.
Is there something analogous in the writings of the Supreme Court where you're not just writing for other justices, but you have an obligation to write for the American people?
I think if you're sitting and writing your dissertation for yourself with your picture of your aunt, you're right on target, right? Because I think if I'm writing for myself and trying to persuade myself, then I figure everybody will be able to at least track what I did. Maybe not agree with every opinion, every single one of the 2,700 decisions I've issued, but they'll understand why I got where I got. I was candid about it. I didn't hide. I stood up. I was clear. I was honest. I was forthright, plain spoken. And you can judge my opinions, for better or worse, on their merits. And I think that's what a good judge does, is candor, the duty of candor.
We finished voting a day early last week, and so a lot of us were back in our states traveling and doing town halls and Rotary clubs and schools. I ran into 3 different teachers who planned to use these hearings on C-SPAN to teach civics. I wonder if you could help those teachers explain, as one of them asked me, about why we have a Bill of Rights. To remind the American people, the Constitution's a negative document. It is not the government giving us freedoms. It is us giving the government a limited set of enumerated powers. And originally there was no Bill of Rights. And as a part of a compromise, we added one. Today, most people, when they think about our Constitution, think of the Bill of Rights first. Why do we have a Bill of Rights, and what fundamental difference would it make if we didn't have one?
That's a big question for us adults.
Chairman said I could have an extra hour, so take your time.
Yeah, I've got 4 minutes and 19 seconds on that. That's a big question for us adults who are where we are. It's a big question for my middle school and high school age kids. The Constitution, as a negative document, the theory behind it, in short order, was to divide power, the better to protect liberty. That's the theory. That you put all power in one set of hands, you're going to get tyranny. And our founders had too much evidence of that in their own time. It's kind of a hard-won inheritance. Part Enlightenment theory, right? Part on the battlefield. They saw what it was